There we go. Okay. Hi, everyone, and welcome to this Lyceum Women in Faith. My name is Rania Wadran, and I'm the president of the Muslim Students Association here at Wingate. Very excited for our event tonight, and I wanted to go ahead and just introduce our speakers. We have Dr. Hadia Mubarak. She is assistant professor of religion at Queen's University in Charlotte. She previously served as a research fellow with the New York University Abu Dhabi Institute in the Humanities from 2017 to 2018, where she worked on her monograph, Rebellious Wives, Neglectful Husbands, Controversies in Modern Quranic Commentaries. Dr. Mubarak taught as an assistant professor of religious studies at Guilford College from 2018 to 2020, and as a lecturer in religious studies at the University of North Carolina at Charlotte in 2015 and 2017. She also served as visiting lecturer at Davidson College during the 2015-2016 academic year. And Dr. Mubarak completed her Ph.D. in Islamic Studies from Georgetown University, where she specialized in modern and classical Quranic exegesis, Islamic feminism, and gender reform in the modern Muslim world. We are also joined with Dr. Sarah Emmanuel. Dr. Emmanuel is a Jewish scholar of the New Testament. Her areas of expertise include ancient Jewish-Christian relations, Christian origins, and the Bible and theory, including but not limited to feminist theory, trauma theory, and humor theory. She's assistant professor of theological studies at Loyola Marymount University in Los Angeles, California. When she is not teaching or researching, she can be found surfing or running with her pups, Gus and Finn. And we also have...
Get into it. You didn't mean to get into the life.
Okay, I think we're good. And we also have our very own Dr. Paige Rawson. She is an interdisciplinary scholar-practioner working in the religion and philosophy department here at Wingate. She spent 8 years in the ministry before transitioning into academia in order to study and teach the Bible and religion through feminist, queer, and postcolonial theories, as well as Africana and Afro-Caribbean philosophies. Her research is animated by her fierce commitment to social justice and anti-racist epistemological activism. Dr. Rawson's work eschews traditional Western European individualism and its methodologies, emphasizing instead the communal and embodied nature of being, knowing, thinking, writing, reading, and interpreting texts. Thank you all for joining us tonight. Before we get right into our panel discussion, we wanted to go over just some basic stuff for you to understand. So tonight we're representing the Abrahamic Faith traditions. And so we wanted to just make sure that we all understood what that meant before we get started. Dr. Ross, you want to help me out with this part?
I got you, buddy, definitely. I was really impressed too. You did pretty well with those really long words. That was, yeah, well done, well done. It's so funny, some of my students make fun of me. And in fact, some of you might be sitting out in the audience right now for using words that are like 3 syllables when I could just use a very simple word that people could understand. So tonight we're going to do our best to make this pretty easy and palatable, right? Here's the deal. Some of you on this call, I am certain, have grown up in one of the Abrahamic faith traditions. I'm going to bet that it's probably Christianity, but here's the deal, right? We're all connected. We, as the story goes, are connected through Abraham. So I affectionately call him sometimes Big Daddy Abe. In Genesis 12, Abraham is called by God, chosen to be a great nation. He's going to have so many offspring, as numerous as the stars in the sky, the sands in the desert, or the beach, whatever you prefer. But interestingly, right, in Islam, he's Ibrahim. Same guy, just different names, kind of like the God thing, right? I mean, God, Allah, same entity, different names. So here's the deal. Abraham is told by God, I choose you. You're going to be a great nation, and I'm going to give you this land, a land that is not your own. So Abraham was an immigrant, right? He's called, in fact, the word in Hebrew is ger. He's called to live as an alien among people that are not his own people. This is how the story is told. He marries a woman, Sarah. You guys probably are aware that back in biblical days, polygamy was A-okay. We'll talk a little bit about this possibly tonight, right? Women were seen as property at this time. So Sarah, his wife, is barren. Huge, huge theme in the Hebrew Bible, huge, also known as the Old Testament. Enormous theme, right? Often to prove God's power, women are barren, and then miraculously they can have children. Well, here's the deal, a little twist in the plot, right? There's already a tension in that Abraham is being called to a land that is not his own, right? But now here's another twist in the plot. Sarah is barren. So how in the world is Abraham going to have all these descendants if his wife can't even get pregnant? Well, polygamy is the answer, right? Specifically through Hagar. So Sarah says, why don't you take our slave, right? This is an enslaved African woman, right, within their household, and why don't you have a child with her? So he does. He has a baby with Hagar, and that child's name is Ishmael. This is the lineage, as the Bible tells it, right, of Islam, through Hagar and Ishmael. And they were, right, or Ishmael is the descendant and the firstborn of Abraham, according to the story. Then Sarah gets pregnant, dun, dun, dun. And now she has a child named Isaac. So technically he's not the firstborn, right? But as far as the Bible is concerned, you would think that he was the chosen one. In fact, that's the way the story tells it, that Isaac now is chosen to receive all the blessings, right? And the land that Abraham has been promised. If you look back, right, at the great ancestor Abraham, the blessing is through him to his descendants. And so, though we have two different sides represented, right, Judaism and Islam, and then later Christianity, what's important to know, right, is that they are all blessed through Abraham, because they are all Abraham's offspring. And we may end up getting into, and I would anticipate that we'll have some conversation around what's happening in the contemporary Middle East, right, in Palestine and Israel right now, and why there is contention over the land, and what that has to do with biblical interpretation. But I think I'm going to leave it right there, Rania. Is that okay for now? Are we good? So we're all connected. We're all family through Abraham. That's how the story goes.
Perfect. All right. So to get us started, the first question I have is, it's International Women's Day, which is also why we chose this day, and we have 3 amazing women on our panel tonight. So my first question for you all is, what is it like to be a woman in your religion?
So do you want us to answer in any specific order?
Nope, whoever wants to go.
So good evening, everyone. I'm Hadia Mubarak. It's an honor to be with you all today. I teach at Queen's University, as Rania mentioned. So I'm gonna have two parts to my answer. One is, how do I feel as a woman in the Muslim tradition? And then how do I feel as a woman in Muslim communities? Because what we find oftentimes is that the practices of Muslim communities don't necessarily directly align with teachings of a specific religion, right? And that is because human beings naturally interpret the text the way they want to interpret the text, right? And there's going to be a diversity of interpretation. Just as you all know, if you're familiar with Christianity, that not all churches will practice the same. And similarly, if you go to a mosque, especially in regards to social issues like gender issues, they will not all have the same philosophy. So how do I feel as a woman in Islam? I would say that I feel very much empowered by my religion, and that is because of the theology of Islam, which is this idea that we are all the creation of God, and that we are ultimately accountable to God alone, and that the standards and the measures by which I judge myself are not the standards that society has created for me as a gendered being in this world, but rather the standards that God has created for us as human beings, which is this idea of being God conscious and living with this realization that we all stand before God and answer for the way we've lived. And so I feel very much liberated and empowered by the theology of Islam. Now, how do I feel as a woman in a Muslim community? That's going to very much vary depending on which mosque I go to, and especially if I'm traveling the Muslim world, which Muslim majority country I'm visiting. So, patriarchy is a reality, and it's a reality in, I think, all societies, even in the West, right? Even though we don't want to admit it, patriarchy is real. And so, where does patriarchy come from? My personal opinion, it stems from the ego, right? It stems, from a spiritual perspective, it comes from the ego, this idea of wanting power and authority over others. And so, how do I feel as a woman in a Muslim community? Now, I attend the Muslim Community Center of Charlotte, where I am the female scholar in residence, and I've been very much welcome to speak there in front of obviously both men and women. However, that's not my experience in all the mosques in Charlotte. There are some mosques in Charlotte where there's a very strict division between men and women, where I, as a woman, don't feel welcome there, honestly, because when I go, I feel kind of cordoned off into a little space. Now, I do want to point out, not all Muslim women will have my sentiment. Some Muslim women like the privacy and they like the, and so, but that's, so again, Muslim women are not monolithic and they have different preferences. For me, as a woman, I don't feel welcome at a mosque where I can't see what's going on, and I feel like I'm just a kind of observer, right? And I have to kind of watch what's going on in the center from a screen. And I also find it antithetical to the teachings of Islam, where we find that Prophet Muhammad established a mosque where both men and women were included in the same space. So sorry, that's my long-winded answer, Rania.
I love it. Thank you.
I have a similar, multi response. So thank you so much, Dr. Mubarak, for raising the multiplicities, within this question and within our lived realities. So in order to answer really anything that we're going to talk about today, I think I need to qualify my positionality just a little bit, which is to say, as Rania, you said in your intro, I'm a scholar of the New Testament, and the New Testament in its own ancient context of the first century happens to be centered around Jewish theology. So in that way, I'm a scholar of Jewishness, but very much in antiquity. So it's not at all the same thing there are some similarities, but it's quite different from Jewishness today. So I'm not a scholar of modern Judaism. So I need to sort of put that out there. I'm a scholar of the ancient world, but I am a Jewish person. And, I was raised within a modern Jewish world. But that too requires qualification because it's very hard for me to answer anything with the starting point of Jewish tradition says. Because Jewishness, interestingly, unlike Christianity and unlike Islam, there is no creed. There's no profession of faith. So there's no declaration of anything really within Judaism, not even one, as I just said, of faith. So that's why we get categories like cultural Jew or secular Jew or agnostic Jew or atheist Jew or Jewish Buddhist or Hindu, I don't even know how to go about answering anything with such a, within such a frame of Jewish tradition says, because it goes back to the second point of Dr. Mubarak. It all depends on who you're talking to. So there's a quintessential joke within Judaism, 2 Jews, 3 opinions, it all comes down to who you're talking to, what community you're in, what city you're in. I'm so glad that we brought up geography. So when it comes to answering the question of, what is it like to be a woman in your tradition, I have to give all these qualifications and then land to that second part of where Dr. Mubarak, went, which is to say it completely depends on location and context. So I was raised in the Reform Jewish tradition, which is really common in the United States. It's a much more progressive politically and theologically sect, you could say. But since being raised Reform, I've worked at Reconstructionist synagogues, which are even more politically, they're more politically engaged, but also in a way, even more politically progressive. So as a woman in the Reform and Reconstructionist spaces, I have really felt okay and have felt that the feeling of womanness comes less from the Jewishness and more from what city am I in where this Reform congregation resides, what country am I in where this Reconstructionist congregation resides. It comes so much more from, the larger patriarchal feel than the specificities or the specificities of the Jewish world or Jewish sect. However, if I were to walk into an Orthodox shul or synagogue or a Hasidic community, it's a completely different experience. It is much less to do with what city or state or country I'm in, and much more to do with the tradition at hand, the more conservative, politically Jewish traditions. And that too is too pointed. I'm automatically on guard if I am in an Orthodox shul or a Hasidic community, not first because I'm a woman, but first because my mother is a convert to Judaism, and she did not convert with an Orthodox rabbi. So 2 Jews, 3 opinions. Jews have different understandings of my mother's validity as a Jew. And because in modern Judaism, unlike Jewishness in antiquity, one's status as an ethnic Jew is through the line of the mother. And so I'm just horrified sometimes of being found out that I am the daughter of a mother who converted, even though I was raised extremely Jewish in my world. Like Jewishness just oozes out of me culturally because of how I was raised. And yet I can walk into these spaces and be afraid that they won't see me as a quote unquote real Jew because of my mother not being born ethnically Jewish. So, and then I go to the woman thing, the more specific woman thing. Once I go through, okay, I'm thinking about my mother as a woman, and are they going to see her as Jewish? And then are they going to see me as Jewish? Then I go to, okay, well, if they do take me as a Jew, then I'll think about, okay, well, I present as a woman, I self-identify as female, I have nose rings, I have tattoos, I'm not wearing a head covering, so then I go to the second point of, will they accept me? If they take me as Jewish, will they take me as an appropriate kind of Jew in this very non-traditional woman's body? So again, long-winded answers, but that's sort of, my initial response.
This is so rad. I'm kind of like listening to the two of you. It's just, it's food for my soul. Or as we might say in my tradition, I feel like we're having church up in here. So I'm going to go like this. I'm going to work from sort of, and right, each of us has a different approach that is doing a similar kind of thing. I'm going to think more broad strokes, and then I'm going to talk about the particularities of being in my body within the church. As Rania told you, I was a minister for 8 years. So I'll speak a little bit to that in a moment. I'm getting some feedback. Are you guys hearing that? It's okay now. So there are 7.5 billion people on the planet, right? About 2.4 of them would say that they're Christian. It's difficult to say what that exactly means. Dr. Emmanuel mentioned a creed, and there is for sure, right? But what it means to be Christian is definitely contingent, and it's relative, no doubt, right? Some would say you have to pray the prayer, I accept Jesus Christ as my Lord and Savior, right? Some it's that I grew up Catholic, right? Some it's that I was baptized at this age. I would say that it's definitely always cultural, even though Christianity is often seen as volitional or elective, that you can convert into it. I think it's important to know, though, that of those 2.4 billion earthlings that would say, yes, I am a Christian, it's important to know that the majority of them are female, but the ones who are mainly in power are male. And so to be a woman within the church, to self-identify as Christian, is freighted, particularly for me, because when I was a child, grew up Southern Baptist and believed that I was called by God to be a minister, and was told to no end that that was not going to be possible because I was a woman, because of my gender. Now, add to that the complexity of my sexuality, and the difficulty was magnified that I was experiencing, the tension within myself, right? So one of the big things in Christianity, right, and this is coming out of the Hebrew Bible, right, out of what Dr. Emmanuel was talking about, that Jewish theology, right, is the idea of the Imago Dei, that we're created in God's image, right? So what I, unfortunately, through the teachings in my church, was led to believe was that I was a second-class citizen, that I wasn't quite right because I wasn't male. I was led to believe through Genesis, and again, and Dr. Mubarak spoke to this, right? But there are a host of interpretations. As many of us as are Christians, right, have the text in our hand now, right? Protestant Reformation, the capacity to be able to interpret this text for ourselves, and those of us who are women now who are being educated, right, and have the right to vote, right, and also believe that it's important to use our voices, right, we then multiply the complexities of interpretation. But when I was younger, I was led to believe, right, that Adam was created first and then Eve taken from his side because she was meant to be his helpmate, not his equal, not his partner, but she was there to help him. And what that meant in my tradition and within my church is that we picked up after everyone, right? We folded the chairs. We thanked the pastors, all men, and we could be children's ministers and maybe even a youth minister, right? But we could never, ever hold the pulpit. And I remember feeling that even though someone told me that I was made in God's image, I never felt like I was. I felt like I was rejected, right? That I was different. And so again, right, the complexities of, and I talked to my students a lot about this, but that intersectionality, right? Thinking about identity upon identity, the fact that as a woman, I had been told that I shouldn't speak in church because there's a passage in 1 Corinthians that says something to that effect, right? And then another area in 1 Timothy where these texts were interpreted, and I was told within the Southern Baptist Church that I wasn't allowed to speak in church, that I needed to remain quiet, and then that I should let men speak first, right? Or let men take the pulpit, and that God couldn't speak through me. And this is something that's really interesting and fascinating because now women, since 1977 in the Episcopalian Church, women could be ordained, right? Yet still in the Catholic Church, so important to know, then we're talking about Christianity. There are three kind of sects, right? If you count Orthodox as well, so 12% of the people in the world would be Orthodox, or 12% of the Christians, sorry, would be Orthodox. About 50% would be Catholic, and then the rest would be Protestant. So the main sort of division that I've kind of known throughout my life and as a minister would be between the Catholic branch and the Protestant branch. And within the Catholic Church to this very day, women cannot be ministers, right? They can't be priests, bishops, cardinals. They cannot hold those positions of power. And within my church, the same was true. I never saw women in those kind of positions of power. And what that said to me was that God could use me, but that I wasn't a perfect vessel because I was woman. And then on top of that, right, I'm struggling with my sexuality, and that disqualifies me even more, right? Because there are also texts that have been interpreted, texts that were meant to be read or written for a specific audience at a specific time. They were cultural. And yet thousands of years later, we were taking these texts and we were applying them wholesale, literally, to our context, right? Even after the women's movement, right? Feminism has gone through how many waves, right? And yet still, for some reason, in the Southern Baptist Church, I wasn't allowed to stand at the pulpit and do anything other than to give my testimony. So what happened was 8 years, right? I was Baptist, then I was Pentecostal, then and I'll wrap up here because I think I've gotten to the point, and now I'm just starting to tell my story. So I was Baptist, then I was Pentecostal, then I was non-denominational, and then I was Methodist, and then I decided that I wanted to get my Ph.D. Because I knew that I could teach in front of a classroom, and while I might be disqualified for some of my students, right, they might not listen to me in the same way. I didn't want to apologize. I didn't want to have to ask for permission. You know, I didn't want to think that I was going to spend all that time in the church fighting a system that was stuck in an archaic perception of who women are and what they can and cannot do, in my opinion, right? I mean, we're now in the 21st century, and Dr. Mubarak was speaking to this, and to a lesser degree, Dr. Emmanuel as well, right? But my sensibilities, right, and honestly, my spirit felt like it was hindered being in that environment. And it was like I knew different, like something in my spirit told me, no way, you can't count me out. I don't think that that's of God. And so my spiritual community now is composed of, while I still definitely have my roots in Christianity and consider myself a follower of Jesus, right? My spiritual community, well, as been online because that's where churches are mainly meeting now because of COVID, right? But it also consists of people who are Jewish and Muslim and Hindu and Buddhist, atheist, right? Agnostic, people who are free thinkers, people, because as far as I'm concerned, I believe that I gain more spiritually in my faith through having a multiplicity of voices and perspectives and different ideas on God and manifestations of God. And that's the way that I feel I can best worship God now. So.
All right, so my next question is kind of a couple questions in one. So answer what you want. You don't have to answer them all, but just some like the basic stuff first to go over before we get into some of our deeper questions. What are some of the customs and rituals that women participate in? How does your religion view modesty? Do women have to wear a head covering? And then this one's kind of random, but what are some of the dietary restrictions in your religion? Just to get us talking before. Yeah.
So I don't, do we want to stick with the the ordering that we jumped in on, or like who wants to go first on this one?
You can go first.
Okay, some customs.
Also, I will have the least to say on this one. So
Yeah,
you're more than welcome. The two,
yeah.
I'm going to defer to you. And then if I
Yeah.
feel there's something maybe at the end.
Yeah, I think the two of us have, I'm sure, lots of things to say, me and Dr. Mubarak. I mean, it really goes back to the contemporary sect, you know, in terms of customs and, you know, rituals with regards to the woman. So in the movement that is reform, and then also, you know, going in many instances, or at least working at or participating in a Reconstructionist shul, it's far more, I don't want to say egalitarian, because I mean, I really appreciate what Dr. Mubarak said about, you know, it also comes down to the person in terms of how they experience and make sense of these rituals. So for example, if I were to go, my fiance's brother's bar mitzvah is next weekend. My fiance is much older than her younger brother. And so we are going to New York City for this Upper East Side bar mitzvah. I am learning, like, Upper East Side, New York City bar mitzvahs are a whole other world that I am not privy to. Like, we all have to wear blue. Like, I've never gone to this fancy of a bar mitzvah before. His invitation was an entire box like of goodies. Like, this is a big, for COVID, I mean, there's 12 of us going total, and it's still this like big deal. And they're part of a conservative movement, which, you know, kind of rests between orthodoxy and reform. But let's just say it was an Orthodox shul that we were going to go to for his bar mitzvah. Women and men would sit on different sides of the synagogue, or in some instances, women would be behind the men. And the idea of that is so, you know, men won't be distracted by women. And I've talked to lots of different Jewish women who have lots of different feelings about it, and some feel empowered by it and feel that it's a sign of women actually being of higher ranking than men, because men are the ones who can't handle, you know, and it's very, you know, heteronormative, you know, so like it's wrapped up around the idea that men will gravitate towards women and women will gravitate towards men sexually. But, you know, some women will take it as, yeah, the men can't handle being around women, and so it's a punishment. And others will go and say, like, what? Like, what? I have to sit in the back row? I can't be fully a part of this celebration, you know? So it really depends on who you're asking with regards to custom and culture. So yeah, if I were to go to an Orthodox shul, I would be, you know, in a separate space. If I were to go to a Chabad, which is a sort of in a way like a branch of Orthodoxy, men and women cannot touch. If a man is married to a woman, men do not touch women other than their wives. Women do not touch men other than their husbands. women in that community will wear a head covering, as will men, just different versions. Men will wear a hat or a yarmulke, but in the very ultra-Orthodox Hasidic movements, you'll see men with, the black round cap, and women wear wigs to cover their head. So rather than a hijab, it's a wig. In the tradition that I grew up in, however, women are rabbis. Women, do take center stage on the bima, which is, where the rabbis stand during services and where the Torah is held. Men and women stand on equal sides. I was bat mitzvahed, just as, men were bar mitzvahed. So it really depends on the sect or the movement of which, you are a part. And the Reconstructionist movement, I think it's the first religiously affiliated movement in the United States to welcome gay rabbis. So I think it had its first, lesbian head of a theologically invested space. I even don't want to use the word religion with Judaism, especially Reconstructionism. I mean, there are atheist rabbis, so it's a complicated conversation when it comes to religion or theology. But one custom that does seem to be shared by women across traditions, unless you're like at a new agey, there are so many, if like I'm in LA now, like there are so many new age, hipster, shul experiences and environments. So I can imagine this being turned on its head also. But generally speaking, women are the ones who are granted the right to welcome in the Sabbath. So the Sabbath or Shabbat in Judaism starts Friday evening, ends Saturday evening, and women are given sort of like the right to usher it in. And so there are you light the Sabbath candles, and then before you say the prayer, you sort of, like welcome in the light 3 times with your hands. And that is traditionally a woman's right. Again, I can imagine, those invested in masculinity studies being like, I should be able to bring in the Sabbath too. So I don't want to, put a full blanket statement on it, but that's one, if not the only right or tradition that I've seen across customs. So finally, then I'll go to the food thing. So yes, kashrut or keeping kosher is part of Judaism also, but again, it comes down to the person. And so the general, rule of kashrut is to not mix meat and dairy. That's the most overarching idea. But then there are also, the ways in which the animal is killed needs to be done in a particular way. But Jews interpret it in all sorts of different ways now, and will take it from, their own perspective. Like, even though Christianity and Islam both have creeds, as Dr. Rawson said, that doesn't necessarily mean that there's any unification of anything or unified idea of anything at all. So when it comes to keeping kosher, it really comes down to the person. Some Jews today think a modern contemporary way of keeping kosher is to be vegan or to be vegetarian. And others just say, look, this was in antiquity, it's not needed anymore. So for example, I try to refrain from eating meat, but it's not for Jewishness. I don't relate it to my Judaism. I could, but I don't. I do it for other reasons. And some people will be vegetarian or vegan and relate it to an interpretation of kashrut. And so, it really just comes down to the person, but, and the movement. I'll end there.
I guess I'll go second. That was really fascinating, Dr. Emmanuel. Thanks so much for, I'm taking notes. I have a few pages full of notes right now. I hope the students are taking notes as well. So, okay, rituals, really, for the most part, rituals are non-gendered in the sense that men and women are expected to partake in the same rituals. And I will, for those of you who've taken a class on Islam or world religions, you may be familiar with the 5 pillars of Islam. These are the most basic. The first pillar is a testimony of faith. The second pillar is to pray 5 times a day. And these are like specific set times that a Muslim is supposed to stop and pray. And if you're a Shia Muslim versus a Sunni Muslim, you can combine 2 of them the second and third, and then the fourth and fifth. So you would pray 3 times a day, but still 5 prayers. The third would be Ramadan, to fast during the month of Ramadan, which is coming up mid-April. A lot of us are already like getting ready and preparing because it's a big thing, right? I mean, it's a month long of intense fasting. You do not eat or drink from dawn to sundown, right? But then after sundown, you can eat and drink, and you're encouraged, obviously, to eat and drink as much as you can. I mean, not to, be gluttonous, obviously, that's not the point, but to drink especially. So, my kids, actually, my 10-year-old told me the other day, she said, guess what, I'm going to fast every day this Ramadan. I said, oh, good for you, and we'll see, it's her choice. So, but kids oftentimes, I mean, you will be surprised, they want to take part in Ramadan. And and I will say one thing, it's actually not as hard as it seems. I think the first few days are the most difficult, but the body has an amazing way of just like being conditioned to what you give it, right? And it's incredible. Every Ramadan, I'm always surprised by how quickly my body will adjust. But this is an important, and I want you guys to know it's coming up mid-April, because if you have Muslim colleagues or Muslim classmates, just to be aware of, or Muslim students, right, to be aware that there's this really intense fast coming up. And it tends to become easier once the winter comes around, because it's still sundown, right? And so in the winter, the sun, sunset is like 5 o'clock, versus in June or July when it's 8:45. I'll never forget my first Ramadan in Charlotte. It was like June. It was like the longest days of the summer. But it's based on the lunar calendar, like the Jewish calendar is also based on the lunar calendar. So it's literally moves up every year 10 to 10 days earlier. Okay, so that's the third pillar. The fourth is zakat. So 2.5% of one's wealth is to be given annually to those in need. And that's wealth, not just your income, right? So that includes things like your 401k, your stocks, if you're a farmer, your poultry and farms, or if you're a realtor, if you have property that you are accruing revenue from. So as long as you meet the requirement and you're not someone who is actually in need or in debt, if you're in debt, you would cancel out those, you would cancel you would subtract the debts, right? So that would take away from what you owe as zakat. But zakat comes from the word zakka, which means to purify. So it's this idea of purifying your wealth. Women, like men, are expected, if they have their own independent wealth, to pay the zakat. And the last pillar is the Hajj, which is once a lifetime, right? So the zakat is once a year. The Hajj is once a lifetime. And if you are financially and physically able to. I will say that the Saudi government, which I'm not very fond of, has unfortunately milked the pilgrims. They've learned how to make money out of and make a profit out of this, which is quite unfortunate, because it's not meant to be this very expensive ordeal, which is what they've made it, unfortunately, today. So these rituals men and women take part in together. And if to talk about the head covering, Rani, and I'm sorry if I need to stop there, let me know. But can I share my screen really quickly to just answer the question about the head covering?
Yes. Are you co-host or?
Yeah, I think I can share it. I think so. Oh no, actually, you won't let me share it. Sorry, because the host disabled it. But while Rani does that, just really quickly, I think the head covering is probably one of the most misunderstood aspects of women in Islam, right? And let me see if I can share my screen now. Okay, so let me just move on to I have just a few slides. I'm gonna quickly get to the part on hijab, right? Hijab, it just tends to be quite misunderstood. And what is hijab? It's this idea of covering, right? It's not just a headscarf, it's the idea of dressing modestly in public. And there's so many variations of the hijab today, how women dress in the Arab world versus in Turkey versus in South Asia, where it's very colorful and the scarf will be loosely wrapped around the head rather than pinned tightly as it would be in the Arab world. In Sudan, it also tends to be a big piece of fabric that you'd wrap around your head and your body, right? And women, and this is the most infamous picture we tend to see, which I want to remind everyone, Saudi Arabia is literally 1 out of 57 Muslim majority countries where you will find women covered in black from head to toe, and not all women, right? Because if you go to Jeddah, but this is the 1 out of 57 Muslim majority countries where you'll find this, yet this tends to be the most popular picture we'll see in a lot of our public kind of depictions of Islam and Muslims. And so why do Muslim women cover? Well, there are many reasons why. The primary reason is out of faith, right? And I'm going to move on to, to this idea that in Islam, your deeds matter just as much as your faith, right? So the idea of salvation, as we understand it in Christianity, is not the same in Islam. And in Islam, throughout the Quran, it's over and over, those who believe and do good deeds. And it's basically these twin themes that come side by side. And this idea is that your faith is not enough, right? So unlike Christianity, where there's this belief that if you will accept Jesus as your Lord and Savior, you're basically good. Like your sins are forgiven, right? Because he died for your sins. Well, in Islam, it's not enough. You got to do your part. And so because of this, I talked about Ramadan and how intense it is. There's a lot of emphasis on doing good deeds and doing the things that God expects you to do. And so I'll say that faith is really this idea that God is watching you and you're accountable to God is so important. And I'm just going to end with these two other ideas, that there are actually feminist interpretations of hijab, which we don't hear in our public discourses, right? This idea that maybe women don't want to partake in this kind of idea that your sexual appeal, your value is based on your sexual appeal and how many heads you can get to turn, right, when you walk by. And so for some women, they believe that the hijab actually empowers them and uplifts and elevates them from being objects to be kind of looked up and down and judged on a scale of 1 to 10 by these completely strange men, by men who are not related to them in any way, shape, or form. They're not interested in marrying them. They're just, there's the love of looking, scopophilia, right? Men, this idea that we love to look at beautiful beings, and some women don't want to be subject to that, right? And so hijab is worn by women in front of men only, and only men that are not related to you. So, and then finally, there are spiritual aspects of hijab, this idea that, God is asking you as a Muslim woman to cover your beauty, in the sense that, yes, you will look better if you're not wearing the headscarf, but that God is asking you to struggle with your own ego and overcome that vanity to achieve a higher level of spiritual experience. And so there's a lot of complexity to the hijab. And I think we oftentimes, unfortunately, see this head covering through the lens of just choice or coercion, right? And there's a lot more to it than just this dichotomy of choice or coercion. And I will venture to say that most women in the vast majority of the Muslim world and the West have the choice of whether or not they cover. And in fact, there's only one country that currently enforces the hijab, which is Iran. So I will end with this. And Saudi Arabia, Saudi Arabia traditionally has, but as far as I know, they've actually lifted that ban. Although socially, it's still quite expected in Saudi Arabia. So we can see those two countries. All right, thanks. Sorry for that long-winded answer again, Rania.
That was awesome.
Can I ask just like a super, super quick follow-up before I forget, Paige? And Rania, is that okay? Okay.
Do it, yes.
So, all right, because I find this so, I'm really glad that you brought up this idea of beauty, because conceptions of beauty are subjective and can change and are, contextualized. And so within the certain, ultra-Orthodox communities in the Jewish world, as I said, women wear a wig, and the reasoning is similar. And then sometimes, I'll be with them and I'm like, hey, your hair looks so good, because it's just, it's ready to go and it's stunning, And so I wonder, as, as at least I hope, conversations of the multiplicity of what it means to wear a hijab come into our consciousness, have you noticed that persons are looking to the hijab and being like, wow, that's stunning, that is beautiful, and are actually perhaps putting more beauty onto a woman because of the hijab? Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So there are so many like intra-Muslim debates about, so there's this whole industry now, there's this whole market of marketing to Muslim women and, making hijab fashionable. And so, there are actually hijabi, they call them hijabi fashionistas or, whatnot. And they're with social influencers and they have a huge following. And, so the questions become, especially like, when they're lots of makeup, right? For example, but then their hair is covered. And then, so there's a lot of intra-Muslim debates. I personally feel that, at the end of the day, it's between you and God. And, only God knows what your intention is. And women don't all wear it the same way. So I have some friends who, they'll wear it like halfway, where some of their, and then they'll get critiqued when they go to the mosque. And my friend's like, look, I'm struggling with just this, like not wearing it completely. So some wear it as a head wrap, especially, for example, Ilhan Omar, the representative from Minnesota. If any of you have seen her, sometimes she'll wear it as a head wrap. And that's also partly cultural. So I do want to point out that there are different ways of observing it. And at the end of the day, it's between you and God. And, it's supposed to be an act of devotion to God. And so I really feel like it's no one else's business but that woman, right? But that one person to decide if she's going to wear it and how to wear it. And I will venture to say, for the vast majority of Muslim women, no one is forcing them, right? No one is forcing them to wear this, because that is the biggest stereotype, right? And I grew up in the South, and it was always like, did your parents make you wear that? And, even had an English teacher in high school pull me aside and talk to me about if I didn't want to wear it. And I was just like, you have no idea how defiant I am. No one could force me to wear this.
Well, in the West, there's one really monolithic view of what feminism needs to look like and what it needs to look like to be an empowered woman, right? And so it's like, to hear from your mouth that this is about agency, this is about empowerment, this is about choosing who gets to see me and why. I don't want to be objectified. So I am making this choice, right, in honor of God and my own dignity, right? And I think this is an interesting thing. I remember, so speaking briefly, right, we're now in the season of Lent. I do want to acknowledge, right, that within Christianity, absolutely, right, I mean, Lent is really a thing that is practiced, right, 40 days before Easter. There's a time that Catholics and other Protestants will make a sacrifice in some way, right? Some people give up chocolate, some, right? I mean, it's definitely not Ramadan, let's be honest, right? And there have been times that I've taken part in fast, right, for spiritual purification or to connect me more to God. Rania and I have had a number of conversations about this. Again, nothing like Ramadan. I'm just going to be honest about that, right? But I think that it's interesting, and also tithes, right? Tithing is another thing also that happens within the Christian church, right? It's supposed to be 2%. This comes from the Hebrew Bible or Old Testament. But it's interesting the way that women's bodies are policed, right? Within each of these faith traditions. I remember, so again, I'm going to share personal, right? So I was a youth pastor, and then I was a teaching pastor, and then I was going to go on to be to graduate to be a senior pastor, and I was like, I'm done with this. It's just it was too much for me. Not to be a part of the church, but in that way, it was too much for me. But I remember the senior pastor, brief anecdote, came up to me, this is when I was a youth pastor, and he told me after church one Sunday, he said, you will never wear that skirt again. And I was like, what? And he said, you're showing way too much leg, and you are absolutely a stumbling block for men in our congregation. You may never wear that again. My pastor, and I was a youth pastor, right? And I was thinking, first of all, what are you doing looking at my legs, right? But the fact that it becomes my problem, right? Not his problem. And I think that is really interesting when we think about patriarchy and how women's bodies are understood within these traditions, right? Historically, how they've been understood, and what is it for a woman to actually be able to assert herself, to assert her agency, right? Or a non-binary human being who sometimes identifies as woman and sometimes doesn't, right? To be able to say, this is who I am, and this is how I want to dress, and this is the way that I want to express myself. And that, as Dr. Mubarak said, right, between God and I, and not between you and I.
All right, so just to be cognizant of time, I'm going to ask one more question, and I am going to combine a few. because they are going to be a little bit more deeper. They might be more sensitive. And I just want you guys to answer whatever you're comfortable with. No means you don't have to answer all of them, but have you ever been discriminated against for your religious views? And specifically because it's International Women's Day, how are women impacted by the way terrorism or hate crimes are defined? And then to tag on to that, what do you think a society would look like that values religious pluralism? And do you think women of other faiths support each other?
Great questions. Who wants to start? Paige, do you want to start this one? We've all taken a...
No, I actually don't, because I don't want to take up any more time, other than to say this. There's in fact a passage, and this, Dr. Mubarak, you brought this to mind. There's a passage in James that says faith without works is dead. So I just want to point out that it's interesting, right? It's what we put emphasis on, or emphasis, right? The text we put emphasis on, because actually within Christianity, there is this notion that you can't have faith without having an action, right? Without doing that faith. Anyway, so to answer the question, you guys go for it, and then I can back it up.
Okay, what time are we ending? Because I don't want to take up too much space either on this question.
7 o'clock. I was gonna open for questions, but I would, to be honest, I want to get this one out there.
Okay, so I'll just take a couple minutes and then I'll hand it over to Dr. Mubarak. I mean, yes. I don't think generally speaking the world likes Jews, and I think we're in a major conversation right now about the racialization of the Jew. So I'm a white Jew. I come from, Eastern Europe, and my mom's an immigrant from Italy, and I present as white, and I have all these benefits of whiteness. And at the same time, I'm of the first generation that would be considered to be white in those coming from that background as a Jew. And so Jews are sort of like the model for how race is a societal construct, because Jews from Eastern Europe have shifted their race, and that makes us really dangerous because we shift. And we can hide. So the fact that Jews like me can now be white and benefit from whiteness, it gives us the privilege of whiteness, but it also makes us another target, because we show that we can change and we can sneak and we can hide and we can trick you. And then of course there's the other side. So that's sort of like the more politically conservative side sort of thinks about Jews as, we're the tricksters, and we can move around. But then there's also anti-Semitism on the deep liberal side as well, because there's all sorts of assumptions of what Jews are too. I feel like Jews don't get to define themselves. We're sort of defined by everyone else. And when we try to speak for ourselves, we're told to stop. But there's this assumption that, if one is a white Jew, that should be full stop. You don't get to say anything else about discrimination because you benefit from whiteness. And so it becomes difficult, again, to have a voice, because we've assimilated so much and tricked you so much. We're now benefiting so much that we don't get to talk about the fact that, synagogues are being told, they're being, just the other weekend, a synagogue down the street, someone sprayed it saying, "I hate your race." So it's I don't think Jews have a space to say much. And then on the very liberal side too, there's this like deep-seated assumption that if you're Jewish, you must be anti-Palestine, which really blows my mind, because just as we in this country have so many pushbacks against our government, there are so many Israelis that push against their government. I have Israeli friends who have declared to have declared insanity so that they don't have to fight in the army. And so I think that there's just a lot of assumptions on Jews, and Jews don't really get a space to speak often because of the ways that we've tricked everyone and assimilated so quote unquote well. And so I guess I just want to say, you know, 2 Jews, 3 opinions. Like, just because one's Jewish doesn't mean that they're trying to trick you, or that they're trying to, or so just because someone's a white Jew, that doesn't mean that they you know, feel loved by the white world. It also doesn't mean that they are declaring that they experience the same struggles as Jews of color, you know, and just because someone is Jewish doesn't mean that they have a particular understanding of Israel having the right to dominate Palestine. Many don't think in any of those ways. So I guess the main thing is I don't think Jews are often given a space to speak for themselves, and that's hard.
Thanks so much, Dr. Emmanuel. Let me try to quickly answer this question. First of all, I'm really glad you brought up the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, because I will say that I personally find that to be a political issue, not a religious one, because if we really look at the history of the Middle East, Muslims, Jews, and Christians lived side by side for centuries, right? We're not talking about like, oh, for 100 years. We're talking about like 1,500 years, right? And so, you know what, if you're, you know, not to sound really controversial, but if my next door neighbor tried to, you know, build like a wall and take half my backyard just because I was of a different ethnicity or whatever, I'm not going to be happy with that neighbor. I don't care if the neighbor is Muslim or a Christian or an atheist, right? It's an issue of you know, justice and human rights and things that are really transcendent. So I really hope and I pray that, you know, American Jews and Muslims and Christians and people of all faiths can try to engage one another on this topic. But in terms of discrimination, I mean, Islamophobia, I don't know if most of the students have heard of this term, you know, the fear of Muslim. There's also been a argument made that Islamophobia is a kind of racism because Muslims are seen as racialized people in the context of the West, because most Muslims are coming from places where, as Dr. Emmanuel said, you know, race is a social construction, but from places where Muslims are seen as brown people, right? So let's say South Asia, majority of Muslim, the places with the highest population of Muslims is East Asia, South Asia, and Sub-Saharan Africa. You know, Nigeria makes one of the top 5 most populated Muslim places. So, so there's this argument that Islamophobia is not just fear of Islam, but it's also a form of racism because they look different, right? They don't fit into the dominant race. Have I ever personally experienced discrimination? Yes, multiple times, and we'd have to sit here for another hour for me to answer that question. So I'm not going to even begin, but I mean, just to kind of tell you the kind of terms I've been told personally, you know, camel jockey, raghead, terrorist. When I was at Georgetown University, and I went there first for my master's, and then for my PhD, I was jogging down the street, M Street, and someone yelled at me, "What are you training for jihad?" and then ran off. And, you know, so about 5 years ago, 3 young students from Chapel Hill were shot in their apartment building by their next door neighbor, execution style. They were shot in their heads and murdered. And every time I think about it, it still makes me afraid that, you know, especially when I used to commute back and forth from Greensboro to Charlotte, I'd have to sometimes stop in small cities to get gas or whatnot. And I would remember that incident and just remind myself, or if I had to stop and pray somewhere, and just, I would tell myself, okay, your life is more important. You know, if I have to say my prayers, try to go somewhere where I won't be visible, because the fear of being shot at is a real fear that I felt so many times, you know, that because of my headscarf and because of being visibly Muslim, I could be a target, especially after a terrorist attack happens in this country, right? And so, again, I know it's already 7 o'clock, so I'll just end there. So thank you guys so much.
Thank you all for sharing. To close us out tonight, I wanted to share a couple of resources with you guys. This link that I'm going to drop in the chat right now is for the bias incident report form. So if anyone on campus ever has any, anything that they need to bring to like administration's attention, this is the form that you're going to want to use to do that. And if you are free Wednesday night, we're having another lyceum, or not we, but the bias incident report team is going to be having a lyceum to discuss that process and what it looks like when you do report. And as Dr. Mubarak mentioned, the 3 Muslim students that were killed in Chapel Hill, we will actually be having a lyceum with their sister, with one of the victims' sister, Dr. Suzanne Barakat, will be speaking at our university on Tuesday, April 6th at 6 p.m. She spoke at Wingate a couple of years ago, and we are, and she's able to come speak to us again over Zoom this year. So save that date so you can come listen to her talk and see how Islamophobia is affecting all of us. I just want to say thank you so much to all of our speakers for sharing and sharing your stories and your experiences and everything. It really means a lot. I know that we did not have time much for questions, but if you have any, you can drop them in the chat. And I know someone has their hand raised if you want to unmute and ask or anything. But thank you all. And then if the speakers don't mind staying on just for like a minute afterwards, please. Thank you.
Thanks, Rania.
I think Gabrielle, you have your hand up. Did you have a question? So Rania, I'm more than happy to answer questions for a few minutes if people did have questions. I just want to say.
Yeah, same. Happy to stay on.
I have something to say. Oops, sorry, Rania. I want to say thank you for all of y'all. It's really nice to talk about hijab. Like, it's like one of the things, it's the beauty to me. I wasn't forced to wear it, as everybody think. And like, it's the same when you like wear a crown. To me, it's a crown. So thanks for being here.
Thanks, Mimi.
I love that. I'm just sort of thinking I'm just kind of in awe, and I feel like almost emotional about this in a sense, like with Islamophobia, yeah, it's not safe to walk around with your crown. And, I wish that I was brave enough to wear a yarmulke outside. I wish I was brave enough to have a mezuzah on my door. I wish I was brave enough to, have something in Hebrew on a necklace. I'm not. Maybe one day, but yeah, not yet.
Thanks for sharing that, Dr. Emmanuel. Yeah, and I'm really sad to hear that you also feel that you would not feel safe. That's really unfortunate and tragic.
And if either of you guys want to share our Suzanne Barakat Lyceum, just let me know. I'll send you the link and you can share it with any of your students or anything, because it's going to be open.
Rania, can I actually share, can non-Wingate students attend, or is it just for Wingate?
No, non-Wingate students can definitely attend.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, we want people. Yeah.
It's great that you're doing this. I mean, truly, you're being such leaders in these conversations right now. So, as they say in Judaism, Yasher Koah, that just means like, hell yeah, like great job.
It's amazing. Rania, I'm gonna just for a moment brag on you. Just to see you from day one till now, it's absolutely radical, and especially in this space. That's courage, and you inspire me, just as much as hopefully I lift you up, but it's exciting stuff. It's a big month. We're actually doing, Dr. Mubarak, we're doing an Islamophobia again, aren't we?
What are we doing? we have a couple of events. I mean, I'll just list them out. We got Miss Conception next week. We have Dr. Barakat coming the first week of April. That following week, we're doing a joint event with a bunch of other multicultural organizations called Walk a Mile in Our Shoes. And so we share experiences of discrimination, and we give students scenarios, and they have to pick, do I choose A or do I choose B? And then we tell them, okay, if you choose A, this is what happens to you. If you choose B, this is what happens to you. And we base them off real life scenarios that have like happened to people in the public. And then I think like the next day we have our Arab American heritage one, and we're going to talk about what it means to be white, and talk about like the MENA category and how that's not included, and how we're told to put white on our forms, and then we don't benefit from white privilege. And then ending off with the Arab American Heritage Month. And then we have our Ramadan lyceum during Ramadan, so that'll be very fun.
That's awesome. That's awesome. That's so exciting. I'm so glad, Rania, to see you do all this work, because when I visited Wingate twice, I will say, you know, I felt like there was a big kind of need, you know, like students were, I recall I think it was the first time I visited your university, a student came and he said, I've never met a Muslim until I came to this college. And he said that my parents have told me like Muslims are terrorists and you have to be careful and watch out. And I said, can I meet your parents so we can sit down and have a conversation? But and so I feel like there's such a need, because a lot of students and you know, I mean, you would know more than I would, but you know, I just sense that they had not been exposed to much religious diversity.
What's really